What is the actual price of organizational belief? Not the number printed on a contract, not the roster spot burned to create space, not the cash consideration paid to a divisional transaction partner to secure a depth piece. The real price, the one measured in the daily grind of minor league batting cage, when the slash line on your development report card reads .217, and the front office that just handed you a pre-debut extension is watching every single at-bat with the specific anxiety of an organization that is publicly committed to a bet that is not yet paid off. That is the question sitting at the center of everything the Steward Berroa transaction actually represents when you pull back far enough from the transaction wire mechanics to see the full organizational picture. Because the cash consideration that changed hands between Milwaukee and Philadelphia is not the story. It is the symptom of a story. The story is Cooper Pratt and the organizational pressure cooker that a pre-debut contract extension creates around a glove-first prospect whose bat has not yet confirmed what the front office decided to believe before the evidence existed. We are going to audit every layer of this. The Milwaukee organizational architecture that made the Berroa designation necessary. The Philadelphia vulnerability assessment that made the acquisition rational. The 40-man roster arithmetic that governed both decisions. And then we're going to go deep into the Cooper Pratt developmental question, because that is where the genuine organizational drama lives, and that is where the real analytical work needs to happen. Lock in. This one goes all the way to the foundation. Start with the transaction mechanics, because the mechanics are the entry point into everything that follows. Even if they are not the destination, the Milwaukee Brewers made a pre-debut financial commitment to Cooper Pratt that represents one of the highest conviction organizational declarations available to a front office in modern baseball. Extending a prospect before his first major league plate appearance communicates that the internal evaluation process has reached a conclusion so definitive and the organizational belief in the player's ceiling so complete that waiting for major league confirmation before attaching guaranteed money to the relationship is a risk the front office is unwilling to accept. That kind of commitment does not emerge from casual observation or routine prospect tracking. It emerges from a development infrastructure that has been monitoring Pratt's tools, his defensive metrics, his baseball instincts, and his competitive makeup with enough granularity and consistency over enough time to construct a projection model with genuine organizational confidence behind it. The Brewers looked at everything available about Cooper Pratt and concluded that the defensive floor alone justifies the financial commitment, with the expectation that the offensive development trajectory will eventually deliver the complementary production required for the everyday foundational role the extension implies. But signing that extension created an immediate mathematical problem that the organizational enthusiasm of the commitment moment cannot dissolve. The 40-man roster has exactly 40 protected spots. Adding Pratt to that protected list required removing something else. In the binary world of roster construction arithmetic, there is no creative accounting available. You protect one asset, you expose another. The Brewers identified Steward Berroa as a correct asset to expose, and that decision reflects a clear-eyed assessment of his organizational value relative to the priority the Pratt commitment represents. Berroa's designation deserves honest examination rather than the dismissive language that transaction wire descriptions tend to attach to players in a situation. A 0-for-5 major league sample across a brief cameo appearance tells you almost nothing meaningful about a player's actual professional capability. The sample size is genuinely too small to carry any reliable signal about performance potential, and treating it as a definitive organizational verdict does the player a disservice that the analytical framework of this channel is not willing to accept. Berroa was not designated because the Brewers concluded he cannot play. He was designated because the Brewers concluded that Cooper Pratt's organizational priority required a 40-man spot, and Berroa's current contribution profile within the Milwaukee developmental hierarchy did not justify holding a protected position against that specific competing priority. That is a geometry decision, not a talent decision. The distinction matters because how a front office communicates these decisions, both internally to the affected player and externally through the organizational culture it creates around roster management, reflects the values embedded in the development program. Players who understand that their designation reflects roster mathematics rather than organizational abandonment are more likely to remain professionally engaged and ready to contribute when their next opportunity arrives. That readiness is exactly what made Berroa attractive to a Philadelphia front office looking for depth insurance. The Brewers converted a roster position generating zero organizational return at that specific moment into cash consideration. That cash consideration represents real financial value extracted from a transaction that could have produced nothing if the designation had proceeded without an acquiring partner. Finding that partner, structuring the cash deal, and completing the move before the waiver process introduced competitive uncertainty reflects the transactional efficiency that separates disciplined front offices from ones that leave marginal value on the table. Philadelphia's acquisition logic sits on a foundation of outfield vulnerability assessment that the current roster construction makes genuinely straightforward to map. Brandon Marsh provides a defensive anchor that gives this outfield its structural baseline. His established major league track record, his defensive reliability across center field, and his proven ability to contribute consistently over a full season represent the one non-negotiable certainty in an outfield construction that carries significant uncertainty everywhere else. Adolis Garcia at $10 million on a one-year bounce-back contract is the highest variance piece in the entire outfield equation. Bounce-back candidates carry that designation because their performance history contains documented inconsistency. When Garcia's mechanics are right and his approach at the plate reflects the discipline required to make his power tools fully functional, he produces a kind of offensive output that justifies the investment and provides genuine lineup protection. When the mechanics drift and the pitch recognition breaks down, the vulnerability profile that created the bounce-back label in the first place reasserts itself with the kind of sustained cold stretches that a contending roster cannot absorb without contingency options ready to deploy. Justin Crawford's integration adds a different category of uncertainty, one rooted not in performance history, but in the specific developmental challenge that every first-year major league player navigates regardless of how exceptional their initial production appears. The rookie wall is a documented organizational reality, reflecting the cumulative physical and mental toll of a first full season at the highest professional level. Crawford's early numbers have been legitimately remarkable. The tools are real. The competitive makeup has been demonstrated in the moments that matter most. But none of that insulates him from the adjustment period that the league's pitching staffs will eventually force as their scouting reports on him accumulate, and their sequencing against him becomes increasingly sophisticated. Map those two uncertainty variables against the organizational mandate of a championship window operating in real time, and the gap in the depth chart becomes visible immediately. Berroa in Lehigh Valley, available within 24 hours of a roster move, addresses that gap with the specific profile the situation requires. Switch hitting platoon flexibility, defensive versatility across all three outfield positions, elite speed with legitimate base-stealing efficiency, a AAA on-base percentage that confirms his ability to manufacture offensive contributions through means other than raw power. The fit is not accidental. Dombrowski identified the specific organizational need and acquired the specific profile that addresses it most efficiently. The Yonio Curette designation closes the Philadelphia 40-man arithmetic with the same priority ranking clarity visible throughout the entire transaction sequence. Curette's fringe pitching prospect profile did not justify holding a protected spot against an asset that addresses a more acute organizational vulnerability. The pitching infrastructure anchored by Wheeler and supported by Painter's emergence does not carry the same depth emergency exposure that the outfield presents given the Garcia and Crawford uncertainty variables. Trading Curette's roster protection for Berroa's depth insurance reflects a vulnerability-weighted decision executed with the organizational discipline that championship-mandated front offices must consistently demonstrate at the margins of their construction. And now we arrive at Cooper Pratt. Because Cooper Pratt is where the genuine organizational drama of this entire transaction sequence actually lives, and the Phillies faithful should be paying close attention to how this story develops in Milwaukee, because divisional competitors' developmental bets have direct implications for the NL East competitive landscape. The current slash line of .217 batting average, .250 on-base percentage, and .217 slugging percentage in his early minor league sample is not a verdict. It is a data point. A concerning data point, but a data point nonetheless, and the analytical discipline required to evaluate it honestly demands that it be placed in the correct developmental context before drawing organizational conclusions. Glove-first prospects of the infield positions follow a specific developmental profile that historically requires more patience with offensive production timelines than their bat-first counterparts. The defensive tools that make them organizationally attractive, the range, the footwork, the arm accuracy, the baseball instincts that translate directly and reliably to the major league level, tend to develop earlier and more predictably than the offensive skills required to provide complementary production. A prospect who is elite defensively and currently struggling offensively in the early weeks of a minor league season is not necessarily a broken organizational bet. He may simply be a player whose bat development timeline is running behind his glove development timeline, which is the most common developmental pattern for players with a specific tool profile. The question the Milwaukee front office must answer honestly and continuously is whether the offensive development trajectory shows a kind of gradual, sustainable progression that eventually produces the threshold production required for an everyday major league role, or whether the gap between the defensive ceiling and the offensive floor is wide enough that the player profiles more accurately as a defensive specialist whose organizational role is fundamentally different from the foundational everyday contributor that the pre-debut extension commitment implied. The .750 OPS threshold being cited as a call-up trigger is organizationally significant because it represents a meaningful gap from the current production level that requires genuine offensive development to close, not simply variance normalization or small sample size correction. Getting from a .467 OPS to a .750 OPS is not a minor statistical fluctuation. It is a substantial developmental leap that requires specific and demonstrable improvements in pitch recognition, swing decisions, and contact quality that the current numbers suggest have not yet materialized. The Brewers' organizational bet is that those improvements are coming. The pre-debut extension money is already committed to that belief. Every at-bat Pratt takes in the minor leagues is now evidence either confirming or challenging the organizational conviction that drove that financial commitment before major league validation existed. The runway has been cleared. The administrative hurdles have been removed. The 40-man spot is protected and waiting. The only remaining variable is whether the player occupying that organizational investment can deliver production that transforms a bet from a high-risk developmental gamble into a visionary front office decision. That is the pressure cooker. And from a Philadelphia perspective, the outcome matters because a Milwaukee infield that successfully integrates a genuinely elite defensive prospect with developing offensive capability represents a competitive infrastructure improvement in the division that has direct implications for the NL East balance of power over the next several seasons. The transaction wire entry reads like a footnote. The organizational reality it reflects reads like a chapter in a franchise's competitive history. Two front offices executing mathematically correct decisions under specific constraints of their organizational situations, with the real drama sitting entirely inside the development question that neither the transaction wire nor the cash consideration amount can answer. Cooper Pratt has to hit. The Brewers need him to hit. And every front office in the National League